right, everyone. It's my great pleasure to have Robin Landsong joining us today. We've been wanting to get her to speak to the group for a little while, and we finally were able to pull it off, so that's wonderful. But before I introduce her, just a couple of quick points. So Robin has given us permission to record this presentation, and eventually goes out onto our Ions Nova channel. So in order to, for those of you who are new to the group, if you would like to ask a question, just a couple of points. I would encourage you to use the chat if you're actually joining us virtually today. We have some people joining us in person. If you'd like to ask a question in person, you can do so by writing it down. We have a couple of pads, or you can actually raise your hand and come and actually talk to the mic. But I do want to just, those of you online can ask a question through the chat, or you can raise your hand. Just know that if you're raising your hand, you actually will be on camera. And so keep that in mind if you want to protect your privacy later on. Okay, let me just, before I get going, I do want to say that Robin's going to do something at the end of her presentation, which is a little unusual. Her presentation is extraordinary. She wants to choose a couple of participants to sing to. And through the singing process, healing will come about. So we'd like to choose one person who's virtual today and possibly one person who's here in person. So keep that in mind. We'll do that at the end of the presentation. I think it'll be short and sweet and concise, and she'll guide us through that. But just know that two people can be sung to today, and it is a way of sort of healing trauma and physical maladies. And this is something that she learned in her experience early in life when she was in Africa. So I do want to just point that out. So without further ado then, Robin is a transformative speaker. She's a visual artist. She's a medicine singer and a medical and health intuitive. She has had 3 near-death experiences, and she was abducted at a very early age and taken to Africa, and her story is extraordinary. And so I'd like to just go ahead and hand it over to Robin. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and pleasure to meet with people who are interested in near-death experiences and learning from them, and potentially, Ions is such a great place for other near-deathers to come together, and people who are interested to learn to value life more and cherish what we have here on Earth. So I'll go ahead and get started in sharing my story. Some of you might be familiar with it, and for those of you who are it's fresh, welcome. And so 2 of my primary, I've had several near-death experiences, and it's really changed me. They were in childhood, so I don't have a lot to compare to for people who have their death experience in adulthood. They've got that much more life experience before they're so transformed. And so for me, since I was 8 years old, it's very normal to me to be as intuitive as has been open for me during my death experiences. And so when I was 8, I was living in a household that was sadly in a history of generational trauma and in a history of generational silence. So I wasn't really being properly protected, and I was exposed to a lot of unsafe adults. And one of those adults was not mentally well, and it was 1977, so post-Vietnam War era, before a lot of discussion about child abuse was even present and on the table. And so this man spotted me as an unprotected child and chose to abduct me. So he came to my school at the end of the school year, end of the day, and physically got me and drugged me. And I was, I think, put on the plane in 1977. They didn't have the security that we have now. And so it was quite easy for him to get me on the plane with him. And when I became conscious again, when the drugs were off, I was in another country and I didn't know where I was. I knew I was in incredible danger because I was already highly intuitive, having survived so much abuse from not mentally well adults. And so my real important priority was to figure out, how am I going to survive this person's mental health state and mind state and not become influenced by him, like not let his psychological distress kind of write on who I am. How can I stay still in my integrity and physically alive? So he ended up assaulting me and broke my ribs on my right side. And I ended up it was on a military base. And I now understand that it was in Bulawayo, Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. And it was the height of a civil war. So as best as I can put together with a reasonable conclusion, there's evidence to put together that he was probably a Vietnam vet who was going to be a mercenary in the Rhodesian Rifles, which was the white contingent of this civil war. So he assaulted me. People ended up taking me away and putting me in a hospital. I've now gone back and 40 years later and found that hospital, which was an incredible experience. And from there, he came and got me from the hospital. Nobody stopped him. Again, this is civil war is going on. Child protection is just not even a concept. So nobody stopped him. He came and got me and then took me to where he was actually going to a market where he was going to make military exchanges with other men in the services. And then he abandoned me. He left me with another man who took me on a bus, and then that bus broke down partway on a very rural area. This is, again, rural Rhodesia, 1977. So this is dirt roads. This is a really old bus that was a public transportation. And so when we had to get off the bus and walk, I had broken ribs. I was just out of a hospital bed. My painkillers were worn off. So I really couldn't keep up with the group. And I ended up getting left behind. And again, I was just like, I am grateful to die. I'm just going to die here by myself in this place. I don't even know where I am. And I just sat down and waited for, to dry up in the sun. I didn't realize how many wild animals were around me that could end my life. But what happened in a couple of hours is that a fully armed truck of soldiers came by. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a quick end to my miserable 8 years. And I'm just going to get to go home to the other side. But what happened, instead of them shooting me, that they picked me up and put me in the truck with them. And I now know they took me to one of the most dangerous areas, which was called the Thule block. And this was an area that even armed white soldiers didn't go in. And people were literally running out of their houses and running away from this area. It was so dangerous. And at that time, one soldier was kind of advocating for my life, and another soldier was wanting to shoot me and kill me. And they literally had an argument over both sides of me. And for those of you who know anything about trauma and trauma response, I literally went unconscious. My body went numb, which is, all mammals have this ability to go numb so that we don't feel the agony of actually being killed. So the man that I call man with many people in his heart, because I was intuitively reading people, he's the one who won the argument. And so he saved my life. And I really like to note that, again, this is the height of a civil war. And so people are changing sides. It's deadly to be on the wrong side. And so this soldier from one of the extreme sides is the person who saved my life at that time. And so in a way, I have the enemy to thank for my life. So his values and ethics, he took me away from there, and he took me closer to the border to South Africa. And he dropped me off with a village he thought would be sympathetic to a white child. So again, there's hardly any white people in this area. The one white farming family had left and gone to South Africa because it was so dangerous. So I ended up being taken in by the women, especially of this village, and they sang to me. And I want to share just a little bit of the essence of that. So my singing is different than their singing, because what they opened up inside of me is the ability to listen to the song in the land where I stand. So when I arrived to their village, they were grinding corn and singing while they did their work. And for me, I was so deadened down. I was so disconnected from my interest in even being alive. And so their singing gave me something to hope for. So again, I'm just going to share a little bit of the essence of that. I am no way I am he. I am ne he. So they fed me cornmeal, they brought me water, and this was my first nurturing with these women. And I slept that night outside on a goat skin, and they covered me with a blanket. And I knew that caring was present, that loving kindness was present. And in the morning, it was the children that welcomed me in. And so I was very tense. I was very afraid. I didn't let people touch me, but I let the children touch me. And they came over, and they'd probably never actually had interactions with a white child. So they were touching my skin. My hair was more blonde then. They were touching my hair, touching my clothes. And I let them welcome me in. And the oldest girl took me to a fire circle. And there she told a story about me. And so I don't actually know all the names of these people, but I gave her the name Lindelan. And so Lindelan told a story welcoming me in, because here's this white child that just arrived in their world. And so as she's telling this story about how I arrived, and I can't understand her speaking Benda, but I get the essence of she's saying, and she came to us from out there. And so she was marking me with ash as she was telling this story. And so she's putting black ash on my white skin and making me look more like the other children. So this is my first and strongest experience of belonging that I've ever had. And what happens next entirely changed my life. That one of the women who welcomed me in, she came over and she was watching this welcoming ceremony and this including me in the children's belonging. And she was laughing. And the children went off and she began to sing to me, healing me. And she was, again, this mothering, nurturing. And so I went closer to her and she kept singing to me. And she was calling to me, gesturing for me to come in closer to her. And again, I feel so unsafe around adults. She's very large. I don't know if she could hurt me. My ribs are broken. I'm very protective of my injured body. But this nurturing, this calling, this lullaby she's singing to me keeps drawing me in. And so she gestures for me to turn around so she can see all of me. And again, I'm very protective of my ribs, but this calling, and I take steps closer to her. And she puts her hand on my shoulder, and I let myself be drawn into her. And eventually, because of the sweetness, the kindness, the sturdiness that I can feel in her heart, I let her embrace me, and I literally collapse in her arms. And she looks in my eyes, and I let her become my new mama. And she cradles me in her arms and picks me up and takes me to one of the nearest ponds and walks into the pond with me, and I can watch the black ash going off onto the surface. And she's really blessing me in this water and kind of welcoming me further into the group. And again, I'm just letting her hold me. And so that night I sleep right next to her and I hold on to her dress to make sure that she's right there with me. And this is the first adult, the first woman I've allowed to mother me in this way. And again, the family I came from wasn't safe, or the generational closed-heartedness never really gave me true mothering. So this is incredible to me, and a really deep connection to life again. So there in the village, I'm taught how to plant corn. I'm welcomed by the ceremony and the drumming. I'm learning how to sing the songs. And I believe this is my new life. And I forget that I'm white, there aren't any mirrors. And I'm just learning how to become part of these people and their ways. And so the two of the women, my Mama Eatan and Mama Tabelo, they take me to the river, undress me, and put clay on my huge broken rib area and purple bruise. And they sing to me. And then they're calling me to sing with them. And at first I'm very afraid to sing with them because I'm so inward and shut down. But when I go ahead and dare to sing as they sing, they consider me well. Shwe, hoe, hoe, hayo. And so when people can use their voice, when people can use their body to do dance and movement, these are signs of wellness in this community. So they give me a naming ceremony, and the greeting for a young girl is I, and they are calling me Shy. So I think my name is Aisha. And from my naming ceremony, again, I really forget about my life in America and that this is my new life. And so one day I don't know that there is a battle starting nearby. I don't understand the context that we're in civil war. And so I go back to that same stream where I was healed with the clay. And again, unbeknownst to me, a battle was starting, and one of the soldiers was scouting the perimeter. And when he spotted me, a white child alone, instantly I froze when I saw him, hoping that he wouldn't notice me. But he raised up his gun, and he was so close, I could actually see him pull the trigger. And when he pulled the trigger, there was just this incredible heartbreak. Everything slowed down in time. And I couldn't understand why people who looked just like him, who cherished me, and he looked the same, why he didn't cherish me, why he was erasing me. And it's been explained to me that he was so close that his scope was off. So he was aiming here, but the scope was off, so the bullet grazed the top of my head. And so it blew me off my feet, and I slammed down to the ground. And the bewilderment, one, at being hated by this person who didn't even know me, and him wanting to just end me and erase me, and the bewilderment of just hitting the ground. And so, as often happens in trauma, I vomited. And what happened next is that my awareness, my consciousness went above my body. And I was watching the life force in my body around my heart just dim down, and dim down. And I thought, if that something special called my vitality doesn't go back in my body, that will be the end of me. And so from my view above, the next thing that happened was that my awareness, this presence that I was, rushed back into the front of my heart and went right out the back of my heart. And the moment that I was in my heart, it felt like I was in a collapsing room, a room that was too small to hold my essence anymore. So I rushed out the back of my heart, and I began traveling at an incredible pace, but it wasn't rushed. It just felt completely held. And the relief for me that I no longer had to fight for my survival. I no longer had to work at staying alive. and that I was completely held by something so much greater than me. And when I landed, I didn't understand where I was. And my ability to perceive was just kind of through a small pinhole. And eventually that perception ability became just a little bit bigger, but everything was a little bit fuzzy. And then it got wider. And then I felt the presences of two female beings with me. And they felt like my sisters. And it felt like they had guided me so many times before. I trusted them completely. And when one of them touched me, I remembered, oh, I have a face. And then their touch was so light and so powerful at the same time. And I couldn't understand how she just lifted me up with the lightest little movement. And I didn't really have a body as we know them here. I had something like just a very light presence. And so when I could perceive and see more, it was my two Black sisters, and they had on beautiful dresses. And I knew I could go with them and I would be free from pain, from suffering. And they gestured to this great glowing sphere. And I knew I could go home and be totally restored, and that glowing sphere wouldn't be diminished at all by all my confusion or pain or suffering. But I thought to myself, I just got found by family. I just finally belong somewhere. If I go into the golden sphere, I lose my newfound family. So my struggle with wanting to go forward, but wanting to go back into my life. And that struggle sent me away from my two sisters and sent me backwards, falling backwards and backwards. And when I landed, it was a gentle landing, but I was in an entirely different place. And it was kind of dark, like a cloudy day on Ireland, and kind of cold. I thought, oh, I really had it better before. And I looked around me, and it was this stone stairwell. And off to my right, this stairwell was so worn by so many people walking down this ancient stairwell. And I thought, well, I don't like where I am, but it must be special, it must be sacred, because so many people have come to visit here. And I struggled to get up on my own, but I was so weak. I didn't understand why I was so weak. And then suddenly this older man, this kind of almost decrepit older man, appeared right next to me. I didn't know where he came from. And he was offering to help me up. And I was, I just wanted to make it on my own. I didn't trust adults. I was trying to make it up by myself, but I couldn't. And I thought, well, if I pull on him, I'm just going to pull him over because he's so decrepit. But I didn't really have any other choice. So I pulled on his arm, and he was incredibly sturdy. And again, I could feel this kindness, this knowing. And so I instantly trusted him. So he was gesturing that we would walk down these other stairs, and I trusted and went with him. But again, I was feeling so weak and almost sleepy, and I was feeling something drip on my shoulder. And I went and I looked at it, and it was my own blood. I thought it was rain coming down, but it was my own blood, and I realized I was bleeding to death. And he looked and he nodded. He understood because I was very panicked and showing him. And he kept, and it increased his urgency that I should continue on with this journey with him. So next he was inviting me into this dark cave, and I was like, I don't want to go into this dark cave. I can't see a thing. I don't know what's in there. I don't trust this, but I trusted him. So I held on to his sturdy arm, and we went into this dark cave. And what began to present itself there was all my repressed screaming from all my childhood abuse in my 8 years, and kind of the faces of everybody who had abused me to that point. And I kept trying to recoil and run and get away from this, all this being presented to me. But again, he was holding me steady. I wanted to collapse on the floor, and he held me up. And what happened next is that suddenly I could see myself through his eyes. It was like as if my eyes became his eyes. And I could see that I was so full of fear. I was so full of defendedness and exhaustion. And he wasn't trying to fix me because there was nothing wrong with me. And all my childhood shame about thinking that the abuse was my fault or I had done something wrong to make this happen, because he wasn't trying to change me, I knew I was born okay. I was born good enough. I was born with love in my heart. And that was what was going to get me through this cave with his help. So when I had that understanding awaken inside me, then all the voices, my own screaming, all the faces of the perpetrators, all went away because I had faced it with him. So we went out the other side of the cave and we went into this open cliff. And above us were was the night sky, and it was full of stars in the brightness I had never seen before, this full spectrum of colors. And I suddenly understood he is one of those stars. He could go anywhere, but he came to help me get through my dark cave, for me to turn towards and face that which was so difficult for me so I could get through it with his help. And so I put my hands in his, and telepathically, without having to use words, I said, "Where are we going next?" And he nodded that we were going to jump off the cliff together. And I thought, okay, if that's where you want to lead me, that's where I'll go. So holding hands, we jumped off the cliff and then we let go, and we were like birds floating down in the night sky. And we were going from night sky down towards sunrise. And the sun was again the golden glowing sphere. And as we were falling, he said to me, "This is dying." And I thought, then dying is gentle, held, and guided. And then there's nothing to fear in dying. And so again, we were parted hands, and he kind of nodded to me like, "Go into the golden sphere, like that's your next place." And I nodded that I understood. And then he was off. But once he left me, I still had his steadiness, this calm wisdom from him in my heart. And so I was going on and I was considering the golden glowing sphere as my next place to go to. But then I got really excited about, what if I could share with my African family everything that's happened so far? What if I could tell them about the man in the cave who just helped me through all my fears? And then I got curious. I saw this green grass field down below me, and I thought, maybe my family is down there. I'll go down there and find them and tell them about everything that's happened so far. So I guided my flight to land down into the green field. But once I landed on that ground, I suddenly was remembering fear. And I suddenly had fear that something happened to all of them, that maybe they had been shot and were wounded, and that they were down on the ground and they needed me to come sing to them and to come help them and to find them all. So I got panicked and I started running around in this grass field. And the more panicked I became, the taller the grass grew until it was above my head. And I was in this forest of confusion and grass. And finally I accepted I can't find them. And I just laid down sobbing like waiting to feel cleared out, like how and after there's a storm and lightning has happened and there's that kind of clarity in the air. So once I had gotten to that place, that simple, cleared out place, the grass got shorter and I could hear this rustling. And I called out to see who was there and didn't get a reply. So I crawled forward to where I heard this rustling. And there I met a being. And his presence was pure peace. And I stood before him and I asked, how do I get back to my African family? And he showed me, you can belong to them, but you can also belong to this universal family. You can belong to something greater. And at first his face looked like a man, and he had a thin face and a beard, and he was wearing a robe that was felted, and he had a sheep herder's staff. And then his face changed to a person I didn't know. And then his face changed to a lion. And at first I wanted his face to stay the same because it was what I was used to. But then I became delighted that he was showing me he was the face of this universal family, and that he could show me all these different aspects of humanity, of animals, of living presence. And again, I asked him, where am I going next? And he touched his forehead to mine, and I could see as he sees. And that I saw this view of a living matrix, that we are all a tiny gem in this spider web that's dynamic, ever changing, and that we are all born good enough. We are all born from divine creation, and we are all created equally. And when I understood this, then I came back out of that vision he was sharing with me. And again, his face was so close to mine, and my faith in him was absolute. And again, I said, I'm just willing to go wherever you lead me next. And so I leaned my being into his presence, and we went through a tunnel. And when we came out of that tunnel, I was viewing my body from above. And so I was with my guide, my royal shepherd, and we were viewing my body, and I had bled out from my head. And my mama Yetan from the village had found me, and she had pulled my lifeless body up onto her lap, and she was stopping the blood flow with her hand, and she was wailing into the sky. And I wanted to let her know, I'm totally fine. I'm perfectly comfortable. I'm held and guided. You don't need to worry about me or be sad for me, because I'm okay. And so I started to rise up, and I wanted someone to comfort her, but I was continuing to pay attention to what was above. But I could hear she was changing her wailing into singing. But I was passing through the veils. The veils were closing behind me, and her singing was getting quieter. And I met beings that continued to purify me from any belief that something was wrong with me, or that I deserved the abuse from the adults, and purifying me of my fears and my confusion and any last remnants of thinking that I didn't belong into this universal family. And so I went further and further, and I could sense and feel through the next couple of veils, there was the great heart, the presence that sung me into being, that was my original source, that when I was a little seed syllable, the great heart sung the final note to make me born into this life. And when I was at that place, then suddenly my Mamiatan, she had called on the ancestors in the land to sing and call me back to life. And that reopened the veils that had closed behind me. So I was in the middle. I could go home to the great heart and be free of pain, go back and be part of my original source, or this calling song. And the ancestors' song was reminding me that I hadn't done my purpose, which is to sing to people to help them remember their belonging, just as my Mami Yatan had done for me. And so I turned towards them, and I remembered I have the medicine songs in me, that's part of what I was given when I was created, and that I could go back and be part of the choir of medicine singers who sing at death, who sing at birth, who sing at people's transitions and transformation. And my excitement, my passion to be part of that mission turned me around in the tunnel, and I headed back. And as I was heading back, I was starting to have more physical sensation again. And I started to have pain and think, oh, maybe I didn't make the right choice. And I kind of started to try and claw my way back towards the great heart direction. But there was like a river moving me out already, because I had decided to be part of the medicine choir. And in my transition back, kind of my trying to claw back, opened up a curtain. And I met another being who, to me, looked like a golden cougar. And I was drawn into her presence. And she was showing me and telling me just innately in my being, we are going to give you images to draw to help people remember their original source, to remember their divine being that they already are. And once you're safe, because when you go back, you are not going to be safe for years. But once you're safe, we're going to give you these images one after the other, and you're to draw them to help people remember their homecoming. So once I was done greeting her and understanding from her, I went back to the final veil between the living and the dead. And there was the grandmother of all races. And her skin was a deep ash black, and her eyes were the color of all races. And she came close to me and she started to sing inside me like I was a cathedral and she was singing a song of praise. And she was saying, go back and sing to them until they remember their goodness and belonging. And then she turned me around and I went through that final veil. And when I came back into my human body, I was frail and weak and fragile. And my Mami Etan was holding me and cherishing me. And with her strength, I could feel some of the physical form boundaries because I was so etheric. I was so not yet fully in my physical body. And one of the men, Atto, came and picked me up and carried me back to the village. And they were singing healing songs. And they put plants around the area and plants on my body. And they were singing songs to get the hatred from that came with the bullet off my head so that I wouldn't go through life confused by the hatred that was within the soldier's heart. So they took good care of me, and I was beginning to be a little bit more able to move around. But just 2 days later, as best as we can put together with the historic information, that those soldiers came back to the village. And again, this is a civil war, so if people didn't join this particular faction, they were considered the enemy. So even though they were native to the area and causing no problems, they were attacked. And so I was in a hut when the shooting started, and I was hearing the screaming of everyone I loved. And the other Mama Tabelo, she hid me and she hid herself. And when we heard no more shooting, she came and she collected me up on her hip and started to run from the hut. And we didn't make it very far before she was shot from behind. And we both went down. And when I hit the ground hard, it started my wound bleeding again. And I wanted to drag her with me, but I was 8 and she was an adult, and I was bleeding again, and she was yelling at me just to go. And so this has been my hardest thing to heal from, that I couldn't pull her with me. And so I ran for a little bit, and remember I'd just been shot 2 days earlier. And so I made it to just a slight hill that's more sandy. And I was trying to get to the tree cover of the Limpopo River, the big trees there. And so because I was still bleeding and losing blood again, I just collapsed and fainted again and fell face forward. And this time I crossed over again, and it was an entirely different experience. And I was in this white landscape, and I felt like I had no body. And there was someone singing to me, and they were singing, "You will live, you will live." And it was to a child's nursery song that was a positive experience for me. So I trusted whoever was singing. And I thought, I had a brain injury, so I was having trouble putting together the meaning of the words. And then I said, who's singing to me? And so I immediately got drawn closer to the source. And I was seeing through a veil this being on the other side, but it was kind of like a light screen, so I couldn't really totally make it out. And again, he was singing, "You will live." And he showed me a vision that was like a record, like that this song was on a record. And he showed me the record close up and it had a deep, deep scratch in it. And I thought, oh, this record should get thrown away. It's no good anymore. And he said to me in this huge booming voice, "The wounds are how I find you and recognize you. And those are the places where I can help you and let the love in deeply. So the broken open places are the places I can arrive to you most fully." And I said, I understand. And then he showed me another vision of bringing two huge plains of land together and this mountain being formed by the plains being crushed together, this lovely, beautiful mountain rising up. But of course, the devastation of the land was intimidating and scary. And then he was showing me that the mountain comes down grain by grain or landslide. And then it makes the beach, makes the sand. And I said, I like the sand, but I don't like all this destruction part. And he said, shall we destroy the mountain so you can have the beach? And I was like, I like the mountain and the beach. Can I have it all without destruction? And he said, from your human point of view, you don't understand, but destruction makes available new ingredients for a new creation. And I nodded that I understand. And he said, what happened to you was total destruction, but it is breaking open the ingredients to make something new that you can't see right now, but I can. And I said, okay. And so then he removed the veil and I could see him, and his skin was blue and he had a black bun on the top of his head. And there were all these ornaments around him, but he was so intense. I was just focused on his face. And it was an honor to be in his presence, because I could feel with one hand he could destroy things, and with the other hand he could recreate. And if he wanted me to die and be reborn, it would be nothing to him. But for some reason, it was an important part of the balance for me to live. So he sent me back to my body, sent me back to my life. And I woke up and I'm face down in the sand. My neck hurts. My mouth is full of what I landed on. And I think, I don't want to live. But he's right there with me. And he's saying, you will live. And it's a command, a fierce command. And he's telling me, pull forward now. And I'm getting this image of, I have to pull forward away from the massacre because it's Africa and animals are going to come. And so with his strength, I literally crawl forward and pull myself forward. And I don't know where I'm going. I don't have the will to live. But I am a drop in the ocean of his presence, his potency, his power. And so I follow his commands and I pull forward, and at nighttime, I bury myself in the sand to be warmer and away from the wind. And in the morning, he commands me a little bit further towards a well. And a woman comes and finds me at that well. And her name is Miraculously. And she's a Black African traditional woman, and she puts me on her back as if I was her baby. And she takes me back to her homestead. And when people see she has a wounded white child, they say, don't bother with her. It's too dangerous to your family to have a white child. And it's true, because one of the factions, the white faction, could accuse her of abducting me, and the extremist would kill her for harboring the oppressor. So she hides me during the day and brings me back at night. And eventually she talks to one of the closest white families across the river into South Africa and says, we found this white child. We don't know where she belongs. We don't know where she came from. And they said, well, give us to her. We'll find her family. And they assume I'm either Rhodesian or South African. And so this white farming family takes me in. And for me, it's this incredible loss to leave and be with people who were singing to me and touching me and healing me through song. And I was always sleeping right up next against people. And there was a generosity and something that just I couldn't find anywhere else. And so the white family was feeding me and housing me. And I remembered, running water and roofs and solid walls. But they weren't touching me and they weren't singing to me, even though they were providing for me. And so I began to die again of loneliness, of hopelessness. And I went to the one place where I felt like I could be held and feel warm, which was behind the refrigerator. Because in that 1977, the refrigerators had a little fire to keep the refrigerator going. So that was the only warm place I could find. And I began to just drift up and look down on the farm. And again, it was feeling like this kind of peaceful waves that were just welcoming me back home. And just like these ebbs and flows of life from the other side, the divine side, just washing me clean and purifying me of some of my hopelessness. And so what happened is that the white family found me behind the refrigerator and ended up taking me to a hospital in South Africa, a couple of hours away, Polokwane. And I was given antibiotics because my head had gotten infected. And that was the loneliest place on the planet. It was 1977, full apartheid. And what's important to understand about oppression is that both the oppressor and the oppressed lose when we separate other human beings and make them other. So even though I was, being given medical care, I was not being given any emotional care. And I was being spoken to in Afrikaans, which I didn't understand. And they were really threatening me with, tell us where you're from, tell us where your family is, or you're going to an orphanage in South Africa, and little girl, you don't want to do that. So I went ahead and told them, that I was American. Obviously, I didn't have the Afrikaans accent. And so they found my family, and they arranged for an agent, to assist me on the plane flight. And when I landed back in the US, my father picked me up from the airport and I was taken back home. But again, this is generational silence. Nobody asked me what happened to me. Nobody asked me how I got wounded. Nobody asked me about my broken ribs. They pretended nothing was wrong with me. And when I tried to speak of it, my mother hit me and said, don't ever talk about this again. And I didn't. I went along with pretending that nothing had happened, and I repressed it all down, which is a very amazing and difficult things for human beings to do. When we repress trauma, we also repress the goodness. We repress some of our own life force and some of our own vitality. And it's an incredible cost on the adrenals, the kidneys, the human nervous system. And so I continued on years. Again, nobody asked me about what happened. There was, as best as I could find, there was no police report. I hired a private investigator to do some research, and they said there aren't records that far back. The same thing in all the places I went to, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, all records have been destroyed. When Mugabe came into power in Zimbabwe and also after apartheid, all records were destroyed. So the miraculous thing is that I did make it through my teen years. I was very suicidal with all this trauma in my nervous system. And what happened in my teen years is that the cost of repressing all of this and pretending that I was fine my ability to pretend I was okay started to get so thin. And the cortisol levels in my body were literally cortisol, when it's excessive, starts to eat at the joints, at the ligaments. And eventually, if it's bad enough, it will eat at the heart tissue. So I started to have all kinds of heart problems as a teenager. And I was literally going unconscious, passing out. And people were finding me, pulling me out of the pool because I was a competitive swimmer. And eventually, I tried to tell my parents about it, but they're like, oh, you're just exaggerating, you're making things up. I was like, well, but I'm going paralyzed, and my hands are going numb, and my face is going numb, and my heart is going out of control. So when my swim coach told them, like, I had to pull her out of the pool unconscious twice, like, you have to get her to seek medical care and assess her, my parents were like, okay, well, we'll make a regular doctor's appointment a week and a half out. So the next day they found me unconscious on the kitchen floor with no heart rate and no breath rate. And my mom was a medical person, so she had the ability to assess that. And so they called an ambulance. And so before the ambulance resuscitated me, I crossed over, and it was a very different experience. I just have such a big wave of emotion of gratitude about it. And that I was floating off the earth, and I was going again out into the universe. And I stopped at this certain point. There was a kind of a point of no return. And I was on this, what I call a raft. And I didn't really pay attention to so much what the raft was made of, but I knew that the raft was keeping me organized. And that if I went beyond the raft, I would just be molecules in the universe, which would be fine, but I wouldn't have it. My consciousness would be in bits and pieces in the universe. So this raft I was holding on to was keeping me in some state of cohesiveness, of organization. And I looked back, and from my sacrum, there was a golden tether back to earth. So I knew I was not going to cross over into just being matter in the universe. And when I really looked at what I was on, this raft, it was, I was very much a science geek when I still am. And what I realized is that this raft was a cell membrane. And so our cell membranes keep our organization. They keep our organelles inside, they keep us organized. And that I was on a micro raft out in the macro universe. And that all of it was this loving organization. So when I got resuscitated by the ambulance crew, when I came back, the oxygen mask was just a little bit off. And so the edge of it was in my eye, which is surprisingly painful. And I couldn't speak, of course, but I telepathically said to one of the ambulance attendants, like, please check the mask, it's in my eye. And he just paused what he was doing, because of course that's this hurried thing to get me on the gurney. And he just paused what he was doing, and he looked over, and he just shifted the mask on my face a little bit so that the plastic edge wasn't on my actual eyeball. And it was this simple, loving act that helped me have faith again in humanity and want to be alive. So I was in the hospital for many days. They did lots of tests. And this is, I think, 1989 or so, around when I was 16 or so. And so they didn't have the context that we do now of what repressed trauma and high cortisol levels looks like. So they did tons of tests. They did assess that one of my valves in my heart was damaged. They assessed that I had incredibly off the chart level cortisol levels. But again, this time period, they didn't have it in their training, on their perception to ask, are you safe? Did something happen to you that was incredibly traumatic that your cortisol levels would be this high? And when I was doing my exit interview, so basically they said, we don't know what's wrong with you. We don't have any diagnosis besides you have a damaged heart valve and high cortisol levels, and you're detoxing toxicity through your urine, but we don't know what's wrong with you. So we're just going to discharge you, even though I was going paralyzed and unconscious still. And the physician that did my exit interview, again, I'm like 16 or 17, and I'm alone with him in his office. He's got all these degrees behind him in this big mahogany desk. And his advice to me is, don't worry about your grades so much. Like, you're just this high achiever kid who's just stressed themselves out about your grades. And I just thought, you fool, you don't understand. A kid cannot make themselves this stressed around grades. Like, this is trauma response. Of course, I didn't have the language at that time. And then he told me a story about this other high achiever girl who ended up committing suicide. And so here I am with no help, no medical help. They just said, go see a counselor. And, there's something wrong with you and your stress level rather than you're a trauma survivor. And he tells me this suicide story. And I just think all your degrees and your training have failed you because you're failing me right now. And I just thought, okay, as soon as I get home, when no one's around, I'm just going to end my own life because there's no help for me. There's no belonging for me. There's no understanding of me. And so what happened when I got home is I had my suicide plan, but miraculously, my body went paralyzed and I couldn't get up and enact that plan. So what was a curse of this going paralyzed and losing my heart rate and breath was also a blessing, because then I couldn't get up and enact my plan. And so through the grace of divine, I kept making it through my rest of my teen years and got to college. When I got to college, I had the paralysis again while I was in class. And I told my friends, I'm going to pass out. You may not be able to, detect a heart rate or breath rate, but don't worry about me. Just put a blanket on me. When I did go into that state again, they set my suggestion aside to just wait it out. And they called the EMTs. And the EMTs resuscitated my heart with the AED machine 3 times. And that time I didn't go as far, but I went into the tunnel and just got some rest and just got some visitation and just got that refreshment that happens in the tunnel. And I could hear everyone's thoughts. Everybody who was on the EMT team, where one of them I knew was a good friend of mine who was actually doing the resuscitating me. And I could hear everybody's concern for me. And I could also hear the younger female EMT think, oh my God, she's my age and we may not be able to bring her back. Because for many of you might know, if you have to do the AED 3 times, then that's that I was dead again. So I got brought back, and I ended up going into finding myself a trauma treatment that I could go to, an inpatient trauma treatment, and just started dealing with my history at age 20, and spent really all of my 20s doing my trauma resolution work. It was really not a fun decade at all. I didn't have much joy, or I just kept going. And I honestly think all my death experiences gave me some kind of almost blind faith, I'll say, to keep going in my trauma resolution work. And that looked like talk therapy, EMDR therapy, lots of body work, acupuncture, yoga, Feldenkrais, continuum, breath work. And a real key happened for me when I started taking herbal adrenal support. So for everybody who's had trauma, I really recommend looking into herbal adrenal support, which you can do with a naturopath, an herbalist, an acupuncturist can help you, guide you in that process, or a functional medicine physician. I wouldn't recommend asking a Western trained doctor anything about adrenal health. It's not part of their training, and they don't understand the importance of the adrenal system and in the endocrine system in trauma recovery. So I'm just going to sing for a little bit longer, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick the 2 people. So just really honoring everyone in this group, everyone who is present. And what I love about sharing my story is letting people, giving an opportunity to reflect on what you have survived, what you've made it through, that you thought, I can't breathe past another second through this hardship, through this suffering, through this loss. So again, this is going to be to honor everybody, and that you are here, you did make it, and that turning towards some of our suffering is a way to make meaning of it. So I'm going to sing for a moment. I'm going to do a little slideshow of my art and some affirmations, and then I'll pick the 2 people to sing to. Shoyahi am no am. Hey, I am no. Hey, am ni. Hey. Hey, 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 oh, oh. So I'm going to share screen. And again, so much of my training since doing my own healing process is in nurturing our nervous system. I'm a craniopsychotherapist of 22 years. I've worked with about over 16,000 people. And so when we get broken down, it can be the place of wanting to be broken open. And I let that helicopter go overhead. And that which we've had to earn our knowledge can be the place which we can share with others. So this is some of my art. And so much of my compassion training, I did a really lovely compassion training through Stanford. And this is the key about compassion, is turning towards ourselves rather than away from. So self-compassion is turning toward ourselves rather than turning away from our difficulty, our losses, our aches, our disappointments. And the same thing for compassion for others. It's turning towards and saying, I see you. And empathy is being with people in their suffering, and compassion is being witness and wishing for the relief of someone's well-being. So sometimes for those of us who are highly empathic, we can go into empathic distress, sensing others' suffering. So the key is to shift into the position of more agency, which is compassion. And that's still standing in our own, not jumping into the water with them, and being witness to their suffering. And even if we can't do anything physical to relieve their suffering, prayer is enough. So again, self-compassion reveals your passion. Self-criticism is a way to step further away from our embodiment, whereas self-compassion is deepening into our embodiment. Permission to cultivate your self-connection. And this is a drawing I did from my death experience when I was going back to my original form, held in the womb of the universe. And a kind response to our own needs, emotions, and sensations is this too belongs. This is a lovely teaching that Tara Brach emphasizes. This too belongs. So whenever we have physical pain, emotional pain, psychological pain, that we turn towards it, and rather than trying to let it go or eject it or push it further away, we actually greet it and say, this too belongs. A question to soften our inner voice is, what do I need? And this is a drawing I did about that moment when I had crawled away from the massacre, and that I could still sense the people I love in the land. Permission to restore your connection to spirit. And this drawing is of symbolic representation of myself when I was in that first death experience, and I was going home to the Great Heart, and I was seeing all of the universe. So reflected in my eyes, represented as the owl face, is the whole universe. And I was giving a talk to a children's class, and I wasn't actually sharing my story since teacher and I decided it might be a little too intense for them, but I was just showing my slides of my art. And I brought this one up, and one of the kids exclaimed, like, oh my gosh, the whole universe is in those eyes. And so much of life is going through that cycles of destruction and creation. So this is a drawing I did when I decided on divorce. I had COVID. I went to a retreat center to recover from both of these, and the retreat center burned, and I had to escape the fires. I moved 2 states away, where I now live in California. And so it was this incredible, it truly put my death experiences to the test. Because when I was really losing everything, I was down on my knees and I was talking to the blue being, Shiva. And I said, okay, Shiva, you're putting me on the test here. I get the destruction part. Can you keep me alive and keep my hope alive to get to the creation part when my life is being rebuilt instead of taken apart? So this is a drawing I did about that kind of old self left behind. and into that new creation. And so much when we're going through destruction, creation cycles, we don't know. We don't always, doesn't happen quickly, or we don't always see the light at the end of the tunnel. We just have to keep walking. So I'm hoping me saying this can give you that self-compassion for any past times you've gone through destruction and creation cycles, or any times in the future where you might be getting a diagnosis or bad news, or somebody that you trusted betrays you. Just to know we don't understand the destruction cycle while we're in it. And we just have to keep taking the next breath and the next step. And this is an evolution of one of my drawings, so I'm going to sing while I go through these slideshows. Shoyam Hiya ye O Mayam Hayam Hiyo Heyam Heyam. And so this is part of my drawing series on the 4 elements. And so this is the fire element. And when I start these drawings, again, I might have an initial vision, but I don't always know where they're going or how they're going to turn out. So everything is leaning in with curiosity and seeing what happens next. And this is one of my original lion drawings to share what it looked like when I was seeing the face of Joshua turning into the lion. And this represents that moment when I was, my guide and I had jumped off that cliff edge, and this represents the skies and the stars being like living relatives. And so the upper bird represents my guide and the lower bird represents me. And I really have enjoyed doing drawings of my death experience symbolically, so that it can avoid our mind connecting any particular things to religion or religious ideas. Because in my experience, our death experience is bigger than any religion can fit. And so again, just like the golden cougar told me, that you're just going to be delivered these drawings once you're safe. So I drew as a kid, and I did a lot of drawing, and when I was in college, and then right after college, I took a really great community center class where she taught me how to draw from images. So I do visual research and draw from images. It makes my drawing process in colored pencil and pastel much more delightful. And in many traditions, there's the idea of the canoe as a way to transport ourselves in a shamanic idea between the levels, the lower world, the upper world, and the middle world. So this is a close-up of one of my drawings with this human being in the canoe, touching the web of life. And again, just relaxing into our creativity. And one of my colleagues says, trauma energy eventually becomes creative energy. And so my early years of my art were really getting out all my trauma story. And then I thought, oh, when I'm done with my trauma story, I won't have anything else to say. And that's when began like a whole new era of my art. And the great mystery just speaking through my hands. And so I did have an image I was working from this, but it becomes its own thing. And divine grace just has so much fun just with me relaxing and letting it show itself through my hands and colored paper, colored pencil on paper. So I do these drawings on colored paper. So this paper was black to start out with. And right now I'm doing a series of all 12 Western astrological signs. So in the sky, I had so much fun making all these different animals and creatures. And I did this drawing after the Tibetan Buddhist monks came to our town and did for those of you who might have seen when they make this live sand mandala, and they spend days and days putting just colored sand in this beautiful mandala. And at the end, to show the way that all things are impermanent, they do a ceremony of just scooping up the sand and just showing that the art, our lives, everything that we think might be permanent is impermanent. And this is one of my favorite drawings. I again just did prayer, asked divine source. This is Pisces, and so somebody instructed me that the number 12 is important with Pisces. So when I did this drawing, the spirals are all by hand. So I didn't use any tool to do that spiral circles. And I just prayed and said, 12, please. And at the end, I counted and it was 12 in all directions.
Wow. I love your art. Oh my goodness. Amazing. Does it keep coming? Are you finding that there's no, you just keep expressing what your experiences in new and ever meaningful ways?
Yeah, and literally a day ago, I finished part 2 of recording my audiobook. So my book is Loving Bravely. And so part 1 is been currently out on my website, and we're finishing the whole part 2 and part 3. So that will come out either late winter or early spring on things like Audibles and all the bigger platforms, Spotify.
Good to know. It's good to know. Well, let's go see who would like to be sung to. So let's see who we have online first. And if you'd like to raise your hand through the Zoom function here, and then I invite people who are actually here to see if there's somebody who would like to be sung.
And for those who are new to Zoom, if you go to reactions and you click on reactions, within there at the very bottom, it says raise your electronic hand.
So do we have any takers here in person, or shall I pick someone?
So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be asking where in your body would like to be sung to. And it's going to be the singing that I've already done. So there's not words in English.
Okay. So we do have someone, Maureen, online who would like to be sung to. I think she's the only person who's raised her hand. So let me, would you like to see her?
Yes, please.
Maureen, if you could, if she could be unmuted, and if you could also put your camera on, if you don't mind, that is. There you go. And then in the meantime, maybe I'll pick some here. Oh, we do.
Great, thank you. There you go. You're funny.
I was getting lazy on a Sunday.
Right. So Maureen, when you check in with your body and your being, where would like to be sung to?
Probably right in my stomach, but then up to my heart.
Your stomach to your heart. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And if you can keep your device as stable as you can, that's going to help my focus. Okay. Thank you. All right. So as I sing to you, just see what happens with sensation, emotions, colors, images. For some people, not much happens. And for other people, they have bigger sensation. So just be curious and see what happens. So I am, so I am Oh,
Beautiful. Thank you.
So do you want to tell us about any images?
Like more like a vibration, almost like an awakening.
Uh-huh. And did they have a spot in your body?
Right, like in that where you're.
Oh, great. Great. Good. So it landed right where we intended.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, you are so welcome. My honor.
Thank you. Do you have someone who would like to be sung to? So she's about to sit where I am.
Okay, great. And tell me your name.
Angela.
Angela. All right. So Angela, when you check in with your body and your being, where would you like to be sung to?
I like my spine.
Okay, your spine. Great. All right. And so for everybody else too, if you want to check in with your spine or any other area with your body, it tends to go where people need it. Shwemne ho ayaham ham nayahe ayo wo am nayahi o we o he ayaham ayaham ayo ho yeah, yeah. Anything you want to tell us about from that?
I just felt an energy through this side, not on my spine, but just this side on my hands. But when you were singing, when you were speaking, I was getting chills, to certain things. So grateful. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for volunteering.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so I'd like to encourage everybody with your questions. If you're online, you can go ahead and write your questions in the chat, or you can go ahead and put your hand up and ask it literally on camera. And those of you here, you can come up to the mic and ask the question, or there are a couple of pads, one on the table, one over here on the ottoman, if you'd like to write your questions. So let's go ahead and see what comes in. We do have a question, and I had this question as well. This question is from Stacy. Do you sing words or are they just sounds?
And so I'm singing what feels to me like the source is the language in the land. So if I go to different places, I'm also trying to tap in to sing as best I can the song that people are born with. So especially when I'm doing live groups and I sing to 18 people or so in a circle, then I'm doing the best to tap into like what's medicine for this person right now. And if I'm able to hear the song that they were born with, try and sing that back to them. So if I go to Florida, the song's going to be a bit influenced by the song in the land there as compared to here in California. And part of the reason I moved to California is I had a dream that showed me I'm to be influenced by the songs that are here in this land.
So the songs are tied to the land. It isn't so much about sort of frequencies necessarily. We talk about, binaural sound and being able to go into meditation. People in their NDEs talk about all sorts of different kinds of frequencies. For you, it's really connected to the earth plane.
And I do my best singing when I'm singing to a person and to their need. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm doing it, I'm just relaxing and I'm hearing it just as you all are hearing it. Like I'm not controlling it or predicting it or making it happen. I'm just being the hollow bone and letting divine source sing to people. Mm-hmm. So when people are, have a brain injury or they're in grief, like that's somewhere when the most potent need is present, therefore the most potent singing comes through. And so I can feel and hear like when it's hitting the bingo, and I just kind of do more of that. But it's also this just like the art, like I don't always know where the art is going. I don't know where the singing is going. So it's not about Robin, it's about divine source meeting what's needed.
So Maureen, you have a question? You're going to be unmuted. It might take a second or two for those online to
Can you hear me now?
with us. Yes, we can. Go ahead.
So I was in my tiny office and you were talking about when you had the experience when you said, oh no, don't take the mountains. And then you said, well, would you want me to take it? And then my whole thing froze. So I missed that. I was like, not at that part, because I thought it was very profound, because I love the mountains and the ocean too. They're both beautiful. And I missed that part of what the exact message was.
So Shiva was saying to me, out of destruction comes the ingredients for new creation. And so he took the plains and crushed them together to make the mountain. So the plains are gone, but the mountain is there. And then he's showing me the mountain is coming down grain by grain or in mudslides. And it's going to eventually make the land again and the beaches. So when we're in that moment where we think this is the end of my life or the end of me or the end of my job or my relationship, that it's hard for our human selves to see how the destruction is ever going to become the beginning of something new.
It's like you're saying, like it's almost like that poem where it says, ring the bell, ring the bell. It's in the crack that the light shines through, basically. Through the suffering is like a shedding of the old and the birthing of the new.
Mm-hmm. And with that, I want to say also, sometimes people get, they're uncomfortable with the destruction part. So they want to sort of coach people to a better attitude right away.
Yes.
So I had a friend who, his son committed suicide, or I'm going to rephrase that. His son crossed himself over. And then somebody like within hours said to him like, oh, well, you know, there's going to be good that's going to come out of this. And he just said, not right timing. Like that is not the thing to say to me right now. Right. So even though this is a truth that eventually there can become a new creation, just to be with people in the destruction part and be witness to that and not try to rush people through to some more hopeful psychological place that they're not arrived to. It's not authentic yet.
Kind of allowing them to have their winter.
Yes, thank you. That's a beautiful way to say it. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick reminder that when you are putting your hand up to ask a question, when I call on someone, we're going to send you a permission to unmute yourself. Basically, that will come. So it might take a second or two. Okay. The other question we have here is, how does somebody request a song from you?
Mm-hmm. So
just so you know, we did actually include your contact information on the flyer.
Okay, great.
Website.
Mm-hmm. So I do, at this time, I still do 5-person groups. So 5 people join in, and for an hour and a half, I work with each person for about 10 minutes. At some point, I may not be able to keep up with those, but they're still on my schedule right now. And I'm about to have songs come out on my website as well as Spotify and other places. Like I say, we're working on finishing my audiobook, which has lots of singing in it. And then you can also join my classes. I just put 2 more classes on my schedule. They're a ways out because I'm going to rest a little bit this winter. So they're out in February. So those are all great places to have a song. And really soon also we're putting a singing medicine library on my website. So every time now I'm singing to people, I'm recording it. So that singing medicine library will be on my website.
So people basically should go to your website, which is robinlandsong.com, correct? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Rissa has a question, has her hand raised.
Noted. Thank you. Hey, Robin. Thank you. That was beautiful. Mm-hmm. I'm curious if there's like meaning to make of when during one of your in your experiences, you said you saw your Rhodesian, let's say, adoptive family in your NDEs. And I find that interesting that you didn't seem to experience your birth family or some distant birth family in that. And I was in a foster home and then adopted, and my adoptive deceased family members come to me, but not my birth family. And is there a meaning to that?
So yes, I'm going to add a couple things around that, and then I'll address your question more directly. So when I was shot and had that death experience, I met my two sisters, who were the two women who took care of me, my Mama Yata and my Mama Tabeldo. And they were still alive in this physical world, but they were killed in the massacre 2 days later. So it took me quite a while to comprehend and figure that out, that they were already present 2 days before they died on the other side with me. It took me years to figure that out. And because they were younger than they are, in the physical life. So to me, because I didn't have connection with my biological family, I am much more oriented towards my soul family. And so to me, that's kind of a pod of like, and again, everybody has their concepts around what's true for this. So I'm not prescribing at all. I'm just sharing what's true for me. So I kind of perceive my soul group as like about 8 to 10 presences, beings, humans. I guess they don't have to be human, that are kind of like my core people. And then when I meet them in the world, like, whoo, boy, it just totally knocks me over. And then we kind of have these like satellite sister soul groups. And so it's like I can feel what that feels like if I run into somebody who's part of that sister soul group. So I know a lot of people, their biological family is primary importance to them. And I think for those of us who have either not bonded with our biological family or kind of anti-bonded, it's not the place where we got nurtured and loved, then maybe those other people, your adoptive family, are a stronger part of your soul group than your biological family. Does that, any of that feel relevant or true for you?
Yeah, I think so. Art be purchased is another question. Is it?
That's again on my website. Right now it's connected to Fine Art America. And I do sell a few of some of the originals, and I can be contacted about that. Or we can also make higher quality giclées. Not everything has been updated on my website. I have a way more art than is on my website because I just hired somebody to transition it to another platform, and then we'll be posting more. I'm also working on a card deck with my colleague Luis Mojica, who's an embodiment and trauma resolution leader. So it will be his words and my art. So there's so much in the works that will be coming through the pipeline soon.
I have a question with regard to your physical family, your birth family. Having had so many near-death experiences, and obviously not a life review, but certainly you were shown a lot of the abuse and helped to heal from that. Was there any sense that you might have chosen that birth family in order to be able to grow and learn in the way that we are often told through incarnation is the story?
I actually have kind of a joking response to that of like, I must have been sitting next to another soul and we got competitive. And they were like, well, I'm going to be born disabled and poor. And I was like, well, I'm going to be born to those people. So we kind of got competitive on how bad it could be. So, yeah, I do believe that we have, we sign up for lessons. I think my karmic lesson that I either chose or assigned myself or agreed to was, can I remain loving in the face of hatred? Mm-hmm. And at a certain point I was like, whoa, that was too big of an assignment.
Too big a lesson to take on. And do you have a relationship with your biological family today? Are they still?
Both my parents have crossed over, and no, I do not have much.
Do you have any siblings? Do you have siblings?
I have two that are living, and one I have just a very partial relationship, and the other, no, I when I left home at 19, I never went back.
Okay, all right. I have a question from Lily, and she asks, how did you connect with your African experiences after returning to the US?
That's so great you asked, because again, I just finished recording the audiobook, so I did pages and pages explaining that story. So when I got together, I started writing my book 15 years ago, and didn't do any, when I did do some research when I was in college about the Rhodesian War, I actually just fainted. It was just totally overwhelming to me. So I didn't do any research. I just wanted to write down my own account, uninfluenced by anybody else's account or history. So I wrote for like 4 years, and my partner at the time helped me with the tiniest bit of research, just finding out that yes, if villages were not agreeing with the most extreme soldiers, they would get wiped out, attacked and wiped out. So I kept writing, and then I did prayer about like, how can I actually find if there's any living people from my village or anybody in that area who might remember me. And so it's quite an incredible journey of like connecting to this one person, this one other writer who's an American woman who regularly did trips to Zimbabwe in that area. So she connected me to another person who had grown up in somewhat that area, who was a travel agent, who connected me to another person who was on the ground in Botswana, who connected me to 2 people in Zimbabwe who lived right next to the Marauding community, which is where I was. So I connected to those people, literally seven degrees of separation, and they allowed us to come stay with them and asked around in the community, does anybody know about the wounded white girl in 1977? And so Mayamu came forward and said, yes, my family is the one who took care of her. So we've not been able to find anyone who lived through the massacre. There might be people, but I haven't found them yet. And so Mayamu was Mia Lucy's granddaughter. And so Mia Lucy's crossed over. But Mayamu and I have reconnected and hugged. And if you watch one of my longer videos on my website that's got the biggest numbers, I think it's about 40 minutes in, it shows literally my like running together reunion with her when I went to Zimbabwe.
That's very touching. And then another question that's somewhat related. Did you share your near-death experiences with that African granddaughter, Mia Lucy's granddaughter?
It's interesting, was it the second? It was the first time I went back, and we were interviewing her about questions. And then Vanessa is the one that suggested, well, why don't you tell her about how you even got to her family? And so, since I didn't speak Venda and she didn't speak English, she didn't know any of that. I was like American and I'd been abducted. So I did share all of that with her. And I haven't gotten into detail with her on the near-death experiences. I mean, they all knew that, they found me half dead. So they all knew how severe that was. So we haven't gone there as much about the spiritual things as much as we have just the physical reality of like where we crossed the Limpopo River and they took me back to the farming family. And I think the part that's so interesting for me is that my body always knew the locations. My body was incredibly accurate when we went back, because we went through across the Limpopo River and through the fence. There was a fence between South Africa and Zimbabwe. And I remembered going through that fence, like literally it's like a 15-foot high barbed wire fence to keep the war out from South Africa. And I went to a building that was supposed to be the White Farming's family, their building, but I was like, this doesn't feel right. And I took a picture of it and I sent it to one of the living people from that White Farming family. And she said, oh, that's our neighbors. Our structures are gone because it became national park. So that's not the right location. Because I was like, this building looks kind of right, but this doesn't feel right. So every location when we went back, my body always knew, like whether it was the right hospital, what room I was in, what bed I was in. And so one person explained to me, who was in the trauma resolution world, that our body kind of has 2 options during extreme trauma. If we think we're going to die, we will blank out the details. If we think there's a hope that we can fight for our lives, we hyper record every detail. So that is why when I went back, I could even pick the dirt road I'd been taken on. And I was astounded because I've done tons of training in trauma resolution and how the body records memory. I did that training with Peter Levine, but I was astounded that I knew the tree, I knew the roads, I knew where I had been, I knew where I'd crawled, and I've gotten to go back and revisit and re-find where the village was, where Lucy found me. I found actually the stream where I was shot, and I found where I crawled to get away. So it was just an incredible healing and trauma resolution, and it really brought me back into my own wholeness and got me over my survivor guilt to be able to go back to Zimbabwe twice.
Given that your parents didn't want to talk about what had happened to you, I'm assuming that your kidnapper, your original kidnapper, was never prosecuted. Whatever happened to him? Do you have any idea?
I don't know, because once he dropped me off, I never saw him again, or, gave me to the other man. And so I did some research on that. And honestly, people in Zimbabwe will tell me, don't go down that road, because there's about 100, I think it's 180 Vietnam vets who were recruited by the Rhodesian Rifles, the white contingent of the war. And they said, the South Africans people, or the Zimbabwean people said, we never turned our back on those men because they had been psychologically broken down from the Vietnam War. They didn't know how to go back to being civilians. And they said, we never trusted them. So we don't suggest that you research trying to find out more about him. Just leave that stone unturned, because you're just going to get into a lot of really psychologically not well men. And there was a group that called themselves the Crippled Eagles, this group of American Vietnam vets who joined the Rhodesian Rifles. And again, we started a little bit of research, and it was super disturbing. Like, the photos of them were just really very psychotic men. So yeah, no consequences to him. My energetic sense is that when I started to tap into this more and heal this more, I think when I was about 30, I could spiritually sense he was dead. I don't know I don't know if he died in the war. I don't know if he died after the war. But I just decided to stop trying to research that, because it wasn't adding to my own healing, and it wasn't adding to anybody else's healing for me to research that.
And I've heard many near-death experience. I've talked to many near-death experiences, and I think what's extraordinary about your story, well, first of all, you were so young. Usually, the people I talk to have had them later in life. Often they are, they have a religious affiliation of some sort, because they're older. You were 8 years of age. It doesn't sound as though you were necessarily well versed in any religious tradition. Am I right? Because you had, it sounded as though what you call the royal shepherd was perhaps Jesus. But then you had Shiva, the blue male that appeared with the bun on his head. So what's your understanding of just how the other side sort of presented itself to you?
Mm-hmm. I love being the person who breaks that idea that our near-death experience is just shaped by our religious training, because I had none. And, of course, being raised in America, I was certainly exposed to Christianity, but it wasn't my upbringing at all. And so for years, when I was writing the story, it was just the man with a robe and a sheepherder staff. And it was my husband at the time, who was raised Christian, who looked at me like he kind of pressed me to write down more descriptions about what this being looked like. And then he read it and he looked at me and he said, "The Lord is my shepherd." And I was like, oh. And it was people actually on Facebook that pointed out to me that his face turned to the lion, which is the tribe of Judah. And I didn't have any background or training in this. It was just my direct experience. And then the fact that my second one is with Shiva, I certainly didn't have any Hindu exposure, being raised white on the East Coast of the US in 1977. So I believe we have these deeper affiliations, deeper rememberings that are beyond our religious training. And I realize, many people do have experiences that are shaped by their perception and what would be meaningful to them. But I love that, is it Rav? he wrote a book, but he was raised Hindu, and then he saw Archangel Michael. And I'm not raised Hindu, and I saw Shiva. So I would love for the two of us to be on a stage discussing that someday.
Well, I think it's very clever, actually, that the other side would present itself in a number of different sort of traditions, religious traditions, because that way, obviously, it was meant to be that you would come back and tell your story and do all the healing work that you do and all the wonderful art. And so I think it sort of really encompasses a larger audience, as it were, because you were touched by different deities, as it were, and different traditions. It's not really excluding any one in particular. And as a young child, you were quite innocent to all of these things. It's kind of adds some credibility, I think, to the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting to me in terms of people's responses is I have a very direct relationship to my royal shepherd, and it's not guided by religion. And some people are like, oh, then you're a Christian. And I'm like, actually, I'm Buddhist. And I still have this direct relationship. I talk to and I call upon what other people might call Jesus quite regularly. And he's got a great sense of humor. And he's really guided me in my healing practice. And it kind of cracks me up because sometimes online, people hear my story and then they kind of start to preach to me about I need to find Jesus. And I think, sweetheart, I have a direct personal relationship and we chat all the time. Like, I wish for people to go beyond their religious training and have their own direct personal experience and do their prayer directly outside of what their ideas are, because that's where the sweetness is, that's where the love is, and that's beyond any shoulds or expectations or shaming that can come sometimes with the shadow side of religion.
So much of your art and so much of your story brings animal totems into things. I mean, the lion, the cougar, also the fish. I mean, just a lot of birds. Do you think that you relate, or did as a child relate more directly to animals because they weren't necessarily as threatening to you as perhaps some humans had been? Do you think there's a relationship there, perhaps?
Yes, and spiritually, my practice of relationship with totem animals, with spirit animals, is also very strong, and I wouldn't say that they're not threatening. I mean, like the dreams that I have with some of the big cats, it's like those are scary, like black jaguar. That's pretty intimidating. But the practice for me is about not thinking of them as other, but knowing that we are the same. We are made the same vitality, and to not fear in the predator-prey relationship, but that I am that. I am the black jaguar. I am these animals that can cause destruction and creation. And so spiritually, from a shamanic perspective, sometimes when you have a dream that one of these animals attacks you and especially bites you or eats you alive, that is a really lovely event from a shamanic perspective, because they are saying, I take you into me. You are one of mine. I will take care of you. And I will guide you. So when we do have these dreams, like one of my really big ones is Black Widow, which I had huge fears of spider as a child for traumatic reasons. And so to find out that one of my main totems was Black Widow was like, oh my gosh. But again, that which we fear can become our greatest teacher. So all those nightmares I had of her standing so big over my house, she was protecting me, not trying to scare me.
Again, sort of parallel with this idea of destruction not necessarily being a bad thing, but in actual fact, new creation being able to take place. I thought that was really interesting. Another aspect of your experience is that you, as a young child, often young children don't have life reviews because they are so young. You had a kind of life review, but in the sense of saw faces of your abusers and the situations that you've gone through, how you'd repressed them as a young child and how much that had actually hurt you physically and emotionally. And the other side, as it were, was really trying to heal you from that. So I thought that was really different and extraordinary. What do you say? What do you say to that?
And that I needed to be purified of all that repressed emotion and screaming, because what happens so often is kids who are chronically abused, we learn to suppress our natural instinct to call out for help. So on a biological level, part of our healing is reclaiming our voice, reclaiming our ability to speak up for ourselves. And so from a spiritual perspective, I needed to be purified of that repression before I could be fully available and ready to receive the magnitude of the love from the Great Heart.
Absolutely. Now, a lot of the work you do really speaks to the mind-body connection. And you mentioned in your presentation how the cortisol just really, because you had repressed so much of your trauma, the body was attacking itself, the ligaments, to the point where your heart was starting to fail. So can you speak a little bit more to that? Because I think we're just waking up to the notion of the mind-body connection in Western medicine. Some approaches are really looking at that a little more seriously than others. You have some firsthand experience with that. Would you speak to that a little bit?
And I think so many people have become dissatisfied with the parameters and the mindset in Western medicine, because while it serves, emergency services are incredible, everything that involves an emotional response in the body that creates a physiological response, that's where, these other services are ahead of being able to actually address that. So anything that involves the endocrine system, hormones, like that's where I usually encourage people to check out naturopath or functional medicine, because the nuancing and the understanding and the testing of those systems is much more refined than Western medicine. If a woman has a hormonal issue, I really don't encourage Western medicine. I encourage functional medicine or naturopathy. And so addressing the kidneys and the adrenals with herbal adrenal support. So there's kind of two directions people can go. They can go the plant direction, or you can take adrenal bovine extract, which means when they harvest the cow, they take the adrenals and make that into a powdered pill. Or there's some supplements that are a combination of plant and the cow adrenal. And so if you have high startle, if you jump through the ceiling, if somebody touches your back when you didn't see it coming, if you wake up at bedtime and become highly alert at bedtime and then feel like you can start your day, if you wake up tired, if you feel exhausted at from 3 to 5 and you just can't go on through the end of your workday, if you feel chronic hopelessness, these are all signs of adrenal fatigue. And again, they can be addressed by checking in with an herbalist, a naturopath, functional medicine person, an acupuncturist, it's all going to be part of their training to address adrenal fatigue. And so you can look up herbs for adrenal fatigue online, and you'll see things like ashwagandha, cordyceps, rhodiola is one of the stronger ones. And so it's really about finding what's right for your bio-individuality at this time. So I have the products that work great for me. I take adrenal support every day. If I go 5 days without it, I just feel tired and my high startle comes back. And just for example, it's like I know this process so well. So my ligaments are doing much better. I do not have a prolapsed heart valve. It was entirely from the stress. I've had my heart checked many times and it's fine. So that was not a birth condition. That was just literally from the cortisol eating at my heart. So even just like a week ago, I had an experience where I went for a walk and somebody's Rottweiler came out, and it was extremely stressful. And so the next morning I woke up and all my joints hurt because I had a huge cortisol rush. So just really being compassionate with ourselves, that a startle or a stress or something that makes our body rush with that kind of heat that's rising to the occasion, it's likely that our joints are going to hurt later, or whatever our vulnerable point is in our body is likely to ache. So that's where it's great to have the things like a really clean diet. So I haven't eaten sugar in 10 years. I don't eat wheat for like 12 years. I have a really plant-based diet because honestly, my body's been through so much. It's like a fine museum item. Like I have to take such good care. And also it's like if I'm going to read and do intuition and my art and the spiritual work that I do with people at this level, my body needs to be pure. My mind needs to be clear. So when people ask about their purpose, I say, eat well. You'll gain brain clarity and then spiritual clarity, and you'll know yourself better. And that will come more easily. So again, I just don't eat highly processed foods. I make most of my things at home. I eat lots of vegetables. I do eat meat because that's what my body needs. But I invest more time in the kitchen so I don't have to spend so much time in the emergency room or the doctor's office.
You also talked about, you differentiated between empathy and compassion. Could you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love that conversation. I teach a whole class on this. And so empathy is noticing suffering, whether it's our suffering or somebody else's suffering. And so especially for those of us who are highly intuitive, we are going to notice other people's suffering. And if you have a childhood history of trauma, you might hyper-vigilantly read everyone around you and forget to read yourself. So I'm always teaching highly empathic people to come home to your body sensation as a way to have boundaries, and that this skin is our border to differentiate ourselves between what's inside Robin and what's outside Robin. So teaching boundaries is, as soon as you start hypervigilantly reading other people, I say, do the mind your own business exercise. Come back to just reading yourself. So if I go into an airport or a store, I could read everybody, but then I'm going to be more tired traveling through an airport that way. So I walk in the airport and I say, only tell me if it's for my immediate safety or the immediate safety of the people near me. So like if, somebody's about ready to be violent or whatever, then I would intuitively want to know that. But I don't need to hear everybody's history, everybody's organ health, while I'm walking through an airport. So I just check in, where's my pelvis? What's my bladder feel like? What are my thighs doing? What's my breath doing? And so embodiment is boundaries. Embodiment is the antidote to empathic distress. Empathic distress is feeling too much of other people and not enough of yourself. And so compassion is a very mindful place to move into, where you're wishing the relief of the suffering for yourself or another without jumping into the water, without, a life jacket on yourself. We can think it's caring to jump in with people in their suffering. It's actually not, because then we're just kind of a mess with them. The most loving thing to do is to stand steady and be residing in ourselves, and then reach beyond ourselves to offer caring and support.
You touched upon what I think you called it something else, but it sounded to me like the silver cord. Mm-hmm. That I've heard people talk about in terms of that's what keeps the soul, as it were, the spirit tethered to the human body. And that when that's severed, at that point, the person is not able to come back from a near-death experience, whatever. Can you speak to that a little bit? What's your understanding? What was your experience of that?
Yeah, so I wasn't aware of it for quite a while in that death experience. And then when I did try to lean forward, I felt it restricting me. And that's when I looked back and saw it was connected to my sacrum, which is the triangle bone, the sacred bone, in the back of our pelvis. And it went all the way back to Earth, which was very far away. It was like a little teeny ball in the distance. So yes, I do think that, and then being on the life raft of a cell membrane is what kept me organized into still being human.
Did you come back with psychic abilities? Do you consider yourself to be super intuitive as a result of the near-death experiences and everything you've been through?
I think I was born quite intuitive. It's my top strength when I look at it from a Myers-Briggs perspective. So intuition and emotion are my top two strengths. And so it's very natural for me, but I think having to hypervigilantly read dangerous adults, it's sort of like becoming a highly trained athlete, but highly trained in intuition. And then my death experiences just like widened it and widened it and widened it. But the key is, when I was in my 20s, I didn't know how to work with it. I would get stories when I saw people, but I thought I was just making things up and being judgmental about like just reading people's histories, because I would get a little movie. So the more trauma resolution I did, the more clarity I got in myself, the more I unburdened myself from all the things that come with trauma response, the more I started to trust and clarify my intuition. And so it's quite easy for me to read people. It's quite natural. And I also don't walk around doing it all the time. Like, I choose to focus, and when I have people's permission, occasionally I'll see somebody. The more disowned people's issues are, the more further out they are from their field, the more I'm like, whoa, I heard that. And so the more we take responsibility for our issues, for our history, and for our healing process, then it's a real lovely dialogue for me to have with people about what's needed for your next step in your healing. So I can really, it's just completely normal for me to be able to read people's bodies and history. And I got a lot of anatomy training because my intuition isn't so much about auras, it's about anatomy. So I have lots of training in brain injury and organ health, because that's what I see. And so my training matches right up with my intuition. And then I can really cut to the chase to help people in ways that sometimes some other assessments haven't been able to touch underlying cause.
We have just a couple more minutes left. And so what is your biggest takeaway that you'd like for those who are tuning in today to take with them?
That doing your healing process is your ticket to freedom. It's your ticket home to your creativity, to your breath, to your body, to your desire, your authentic desire to take care of yourself. So whatever your next step is in attachment trauma healing, in grief healing, in self-esteem healing, which all comes back to attachment and trauma healing, just take that next step and be willing to experiment with all kinds of different modalities and find out what's right for you at this time in your healing process.
And do you believe that everybody can be healed, even though they don't necessarily feel that they had any trauma in their past, in their childhoods, that they feel they had a decent life? Do you feel that everybody can benefit from just the looking in?
Yeah. If somebody, that was a couple of people who got lucky and had good enough parenting, good enough experiences, then reach out and be of service to other people and let that be your healing process. And I do believe there are complex mental health things like narcissism or different biological chemistry situations that can really make a person's healing process much a steeper climb. But spiritually, I do believe everybody has that potency.
Very good. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you, and what a fascinating story, and how wonderfully you present it, and love your art. Love everything about you, Robin. So I want to say a huge thank you for joining us today. Wish you the very, very best in your journey going forward with the audible books and all the art and the cards and everything that's coming forth. It's going to be of tremendous help to a lot of people on their healing journey. So thank you very much. And we're getting lots of thank yous from people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been my honor. I love sharing my story, and may it serve many.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Right. Namaste.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time. Bye-bye now. Thanks.